Morrissey Show. Joining us as always on Tuesday's podcast, Andrew Malcolm, the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of RedState.com. I just love that, Regent of RedState.com.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. People start calling me Reg.
There you go, Reg. Or you can just call him Andrew, because that's his name.
Well, that's true.
So lots of stuff to discuss today. We got a great column from Andrew over at RedState.com. Let's start off just quickly in Ukraine. It doesn't look like the Russians are doing very well, but it doesn't look like the Russians are recognizing that they're doing very well. And this is going to set us up for a couple of different topics here in this half hour. But just really quickly, as of Monday afternoon when we're doing this, I mean, what's your take on the coverage of Ukraine?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned last week that I thought the combat coverage was kind of naive. And I think you're right. With a little experience, it's gotten somewhat better, but it's disappointing to me. Of course, we're only getting it from one side, so you're only seeing almost all dead Russians and blown up Russian equipment. And then the bombed side of apartment buildings in Ukraine and so on. It's so sad. And now that reporters have finally got to Poland at the border, we're seeing refugees coming across the blown up bridges. And it's very reminiscent of sad war scenes that we've seen all too often in the past. And I know Biden can't get us involved militarily. I hope that secretly we're doing stuff to help Ukraine. At the very least, getting some non-uniform ghosts in there to study what the Russians are doing or failing to do, and finding out the weak points of that equipment that keeps getting blown up. So we learn a little bit from this in exchange for our military equipment that's coming too late. To put a political overlay on it, it doesn't help Biden to not get in trouble over sending troops in. I'm not suggesting we send troops in, but the pathos of a war zone of good people and an elected democracy under attack from the Russians, while we just stand there with our arms crossed and go, oh, they shouldn't be doing that. Here's some guns. It's just, I think it makes him look weak. Biden look weak, and of course then he goes off on another little mini vacation. It's just it's not a strong president, and that's what prompted me to write about that column subject this week. But the whole thing is, and then you see Boris Johnson speak in Parliament. Boy, he talks real good.
Well, this does get into your column, right? The fact that Joe Biden just simply I'll put it politely, and I'll let you drive the point the rest of the way home. This is sort of like just starting the little wood screw in the frame, and then you're going to bring the impact driver and just plunge that thing home. It doesn't look like he is meeting the moment. Joe Biden is meeting the moment here.
No, it's not. He's lost. I said in the column, well, I think the headline in the column was, it's a scary fact. Joe Biden is not all there, and nobody's doing anything about it. I guess a couple of senators have said, well, we should bring in the 25th Amendment, but yeah.
Well, that's not Congress's job to bring in the 25th Amendment. That's the cabinet and the vice president who does that anyway.
But it's not going to happen. It's just, I said that he's always been a talker, okay? And before he had access to the nuclear launch codes, it was kind of cute. The guy would be a little goofy and he'd swear in public, and he's like the crazy uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. But now the guy's in charge, allegedly. And a lot of people don't believe he really is, that there's other people pulling strings that we don't know about in the background. And so his musings take on a maniacal tone of, there's no point to them. He's talking at their mental meanderings that go nowhere. And we've had 14 months of this now. We've had some real policy screw ups like Afghan exit and failing to get the pandemic under control, and inflation being just a blip, except now it's a year old and gas prices are the highest it's been since, oh, look, the election year for Obama and Biden. It's something that comes around whenever you get all these electric car people that want to drive the price of gas up, so you have to buy an electric car. He just looks, well, like the headline said, not all there.
Well, he looks lost. I mean, even if you're not interested in pursuing the cognitive difficulties, right, or the alleged cognitive difficulties of Joe Biden, the fact is that he doesn't have a lot of energy. I mean, we're about a week out now from the State of the Union address, right? And I'm not sure you and I actually had a chance to discuss the State of the Union address. As I have remarked a couple of times since then, this is a speech which is primarily watched by supporters of the president and masochistic bloggers. Me being one of them, I did watch it live.
So that readers don't have to watch.
Exactly. So they can just follow me on Twitter and all my little snarky comments and enjoy that instead of having to actually watch this anachronistic imperial spectacle that has no business being in a. I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox again. But I mean, he delivered a speech. It was meandering, but I think it was written meanderingly too, for that matter. And it was a laundry list speech. It was your basic State of the Union speech. Even the part that was halfway decent on Ukraine really didn't have anything to say of substance. There was a lot of platitudes about supporting, the Ukrainians. They had the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States there, and that was a very good emotional moment. And so, I mean, you got all these sort of rhetorical trappings, but nothing of substance was said in any of this speech. And it looked like, for most of it, Joe Biden was either just sort of going through the motions of reading the speech off the teleprompter or acting angry in as a sort of a substitute for passion or connection. And then at the very end, and Andrew, I got to ask you what the hell this meant. At the very end, you say, God bless, the United States of America, God bless Americans. You go through all those things. It's said differently by every president, but it's basically the same litany that finishes a State of the Union address. And then at the very end, he adds, go get him.
Yeah. Well, see, that's another example of what?
Yeah.
I mean, in his mind, which I happen to think is addled, but in his mind, that was kind of a really a little bit different kicker. And the rest of the world is like, what? But nobody does anything, I mean, the media that doesn't love him, but they're afraid to hurt him. They just lay it out there. And the rest of us look at it and go, didn't we give constitutional protections to these media guys? And they're not being a watchdog at all. They're just being a transcript. And this guy is, well, he looks creepy, but he's acting creepy. I mean, he does things like my grandfather, who rest his soul, had hardening of the arteries. And I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. At one point, he's, an old guy on the porch whittling, telling me stories about his childhood in the late 1800s. And in the next moment, he's a junkyard Doberman from the Bronx because he's not aware. He's not aware of himself anymore.
Right.
And then an hour later, because his wife forced him to, he comes and apologizes, but he doesn't know what he's apologizing for. He's not aware. And I think enough Americans have gone through that in their own family to read it and then to be told, well, don't believe your lying eyes. And there's nobody in authority positions to do anything about it, to say, we need an understanding. We need to have this man explain, or someone explain. But then you see Biden pause to go to answer questions from reporters, and his wife comes and leads him away by the hand like a child in the grocery store. She did that. Remember, he started to speak at a White House back lawn event, and the band was playing. He just started to speak about, well, it's nice to be, and his wife came and took him away by the hand.
Right.
And nobody but people like you and me were watching, and we say to each other, wait a minute, this isn't normal. And there was a poll, the Issues and Insights guys, who are really good, by the way. If you're not getting their morning briefing, it's worth it. They have a poll that they put out, and it points out that most Americans think that this Ukraine event was invited by Biden showing his weakness in the Afghan debacle.
Yeah. No, I think that's at least one of the guideposts by which Vladimir Putin decided to press this issue right now. But going back to that State of the Union address, and in relation to your column, what I was really struck by was how disconnected Joe Biden seemed from the political reality. I mean, again, we're not going to talk about, we've already talked about the cognitive issues, but I'm just talking about a president whose job approval rating has been collapsing, who's clearly not resonating with American voters, who's suffered through 2 or 3 major legislative losses in Congress over the last couple of months. And the speech itself was basically an argument for passing the 2 bills that have already lost in Congress. And it's a stay the course speech that might have been appropriate for a president who is riding around 55% in job approval ratings, right? It was the same campaign platform that he's adopted since he took office, and it has proven incredibly unpopular. And I was really struck in this speech about, he didn't even seem to sense that there was a need for a reset. I mean, he didn't even try to convince people about this stuff. He was just saying it as like, oh, well, this is what it's going to do, and this is what we're going to pursue. And as if they haven't been saying it for months as his polling numbers have collapsed. Yeah. That struck me as odd.
Yeah, with the legislative weak control, it's not really control that he has, and he can't do anything. He's going through the motions, as you said, but it's like the last year of a president, where they do go through the motions. They know that it's too late really to do anything of substance. But once again, Biden doesn't seem aware of the realities around him or of himself, of the words he's saying. He's reading them generally as they're written. But then he calls Kamala Harris president, and he can't remember the names of people that he's talking to. Americans are just kind of shaking their heads, and I hope it doesn't get to Oh, well, that's just our senile president. Jeez.
Yeah.
There has to be some accountability here.
That's the bigotry of low
Yeah,
expectations right there.
yeah, yeah, and the sympathy. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a guy on Twitter who suggested that, well, he has had some successes, and he is old. And he said, well, then he shouldn't be there.
Right.
I mean, this is not a president is not something that you need to be understanding about. We need to be demanding. And this guy isn't living up to expectations.
Right. Now, one of the names that he must be forgetting at the moment, this is what's known as a segue in the business, folks. One of the names that he might be forgetting of late is the name Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Yeah. Huh.
You remember him? He used to be on like all sorts of cable shows.
Well, he used to be on every Sunday show, I mean, every Sunday on at least one or two of them with a tape. It's like, obviously somebody said, go away. You're becoming a distraction from the main guy.
Well, I don't think
he's the highest paid guy. He gets over 400 grand. He gets more than the president does.
Yeah, it's because he's been around for so long that his salary kept escalating, which is another reason why maybe he shouldn't be there. But it's not that he was distracting from the president. I mean, the timing on this is pretty obvious, right? I mean, Anthony Fauci's out there talking about mask mandates. It's risky to get rid of mask mandates. Don't get rid of mask mandates. You still need to mask kids in schools, even though there's no science behind that whatsoever. But then when Democratic governors started realizing, we're going to lose and lose really big, and they start undoing the mask mandates, Anthony Fauci's going out there and saying it's risky to do this. And suddenly Anthony Fauci disappears off of all these cable shows. Now, it's not that he's entirely disappeared. If you go over to the NIAID website, you can find out that, Anthony Fauci was on a Bloomberg television podcast. He sent a message to the 4th annual virtual Dominicans on Hill. And he was also on another podcast for the Canadians, the CBC, right?
Great. Yeah.
And he was paying tribute. In that case, he was paying tribute to a doctor a healthcare advocate whom he knew. So I mean, it's a different topic anyway. And then he was at a press briefing by the White House and HHS public health officials, which, as director of NIAID, could hardly avoid. But this was a guy who was a surrogate on CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS. As you said, practically every Sunday, this guy was out there. And all of a sudden, he's doing podcasts and local television news. And that's it. And I guarantee you it's because they did not want him out there embarrassing Democratic governors.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And Biden ahead of the State of the Union address.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What can you say? The guy had become a lightning rod for coverage, and he added to the very strong impression, which is still there, but he added to the very strong impression that Biden and his administration are just not connected with Americans or reality.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be doing this. We can't be doing this. This is dangerous. We've already moved on, Doctor. Let's mentally catch up here and go away.
Well, and I think that it would have been a smart move by the Biden administration when they first came into office to ask Fauci to take a much less, public persona and just focus on his job at the NIAID and find a better surrogate to put on television, even if they weren't going to change the policy, which they weren't until it became a political albatross in the middle of last month. at least it would have given them a chance to have a more credible face
Yeah.
promoting that. I mean, and again, I mean, it's a public message. You know, every White House does messaging. You know, it's naive to think otherwise. But you find people who are effective at messaging, and it was clear that Fauci had lost effectiveness with the group of people that they wanted to that they wanted to convince, which were the unvaccinated and the people who were resisting mask mandates. So you find somebody else who might be able to speak to them, maybe by first acknowledging that they have some legitimate questions about these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, yeah, I mean,
and in a way it is understandable, but it is deeply regrettable. At the beginning, they acted like they knew everything.
Yeah.
And instead of saying honestly, I mean, it's supposed to be transparent and open, honestly saying, look, folks, this is so new. There's so much we don't know, but we're going to try to protect Americans by doing everything we can think of. Even if some of them don't work in the end, we have to try. So if you please cooperate with us, we'll tell you what we don't know. And right now, it's most of it we don't know. But we're going to try with this mask thing. We're going to try with lockdowns or whatever they wanted to say. But instead, they're like, okay, well, 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Yeah.
Especially in hindsight, but even at the time, 2 weeks, really, for a brand new virus that we've never had any experience with? I don't think so. And over time, people look and go, you know what? They don't know what they're talking about. So in the unlikely event that they end up talking about something that's correct or helpful, or might be right, everybody goes, no, okay, because it's the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah.
I'm not listening to him anymore, and that's when Anthony Fauci had worn off his welcome. Sitting close to people at the Washington Nationals game without a mask on. It's the hypocrisy is just overwhelming. And they look ignorant instead of what they're supposed to be as intelligent, honest leaders.
They look ignorant, and they don't have credibility, and it spreads. I mean, that's a contagion in and of itself. You got Rochelle Walensky.
Absolutely.
You got Rochelle Walensky, who can't describe the science behind mask mandates, but insists that we need to keep them in place, and. She keeps reversing her positions on things, so that's not a credibility booster. They need somebody in there who's professional at message. First off, figuring out what their message actually is, and then get a professional in there to message it. And they've just never done that, and it shows. And for that matter, the Trump administration had issues with that as well. And with some of the same people, with Francis Collins, with Anthony Fauci. Walensky wasn't part of that, but even Redfield, who was at CDC at the time, had some issues with trying to figure out what it is exactly that he wanted to say. Now that he figured it out a lot earlier than the other two, and of course he's no longer around.
Yeah, well, that's the arrogance of authority.
Yeah.
I worked for a governor who was constantly reminding his senior aides, remember, we're only here temporarily by the people's permission. We don't know everything, and we have to be honest about that. And if anybody acted arrogantly, boy, they were gone in a heartbeat. It's just you can't do that in an elective office. Now, the feds can, and Joe Biden can, because he's around for another, God help us, 1,049 days or whatever I said in the column.
Yeah.
But Americans, they want to respect their leaders, but they don't like arrogance, and they really, really don't like hypocrisy.
Yep. Last topic, we'll spend a couple minutes on this, then we'll get to the jokes of the week. the Russian envoy to the Iran nuclear deal talks was bragging late yesterday or early today that the Iranians got much more out of this deal than they expected, and that China was really helpful in in doing this deal with the United States. Apparently, we're outsourcing our national security to Russia now, and I mean, it was always a questionable decision to include them in these talks. But after the invasion of Ukraine, how do you keep those people in place? And you've got Mikhail Ulyanov now saying, well, we got Iran a much better deal than they were going to get otherwise. And apparently that's fine by Joe Biden because they're still going to go forward with the deal, Andrew.
Even though they're almost at the finish line anyway.
Yeah.
The Iranians. There's a long record of this. Remember back, maybe people don't, but back in 2009, that was the famous attempted reset with Russia that Obama and Hillary Clinton tried.
Yep.
And Obama, without even telling Eastern European countries that had agreed to this at some peril, without telling them, he killed George W. Bush missile defense system that was to go into Eastern Europe as a gesture of goodwill towards Putin, because he wanted Putin to help him control Iran's nuclear ambitions. Well, Putin just like, yeah, okay, thanks a lot. And having just months before annexed 2 provinces of Georgia and the Georgia in Europe, not the one over here.
Right, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yet, anyway.
Yeah, right. And so right away they pick up, the Russians pick up on the weakness. And then this went on. We don't need to go into great detail, but it went on. And then in 2011, Obama's, if we see a lot of chemical weapons being moved around in Syria, that's when we have to recalculate our attitude. And then, of course, over the next year, they were moving a lot around, and then they were using them, and pressure mounted on Obama to do something. And Putin, the wily son of a gun, he steps in and says, well, look, I will mediate and I'll get Syria to surrender all of their chemical weapons. So they turned in 1,600 tons of them or whatever. And that got Obama off the hook. But of course, it wasn't all of the chemical weapons, and they used them again. And what happened? They used them again in the first early months of Donald Trump. And his response was, within 72 hours, he sent 59 cruise missiles in to blow up much of the air base that the attack was launched from. Yep. Now, that doesn't bring back the 1,400 Syrian civilians who died, gasping and choking from the gas, but it does show a resolve. And as I pointed out in last week's column, Putin didn't try any of these territorial grabs during Trump's 4 years.
Sure enough.
Trump's 4 years are sandwiched by Georgia, by annexing Crimea during the Obama years, and now going after Ukraine and starting his military buildup on the Ukrainian border 60 days after Trump went home.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's just the weakness that is exuded through those glassy eyes of Biden. I'm afraid we're going to pay a penalty. And there's China that's talking more about taking over Taiwan finally, and we see North Korea launching its hypersonic missiles and testing ICBMs again.
Yep.
Because there's no sanctions. Sanctions haven't worked, Ed, as you know. They hurt people, but the guys ruling those people are not susceptible to them, and it doesn't hurt them. If any Russian still has money left in the United States, he deserves to lose it. That's all.
All right. Well, with that thought in mind, don't forget to go over to redstate.com and read Andrew's latest column, A Scary Fact President Biden is Not All There and No One is Doing Anything. How to succeed in business without really trying, and everything you wanted to know about sex, but we're afraid to ask Joe Biden. Speaking of which, the jokes of the week from Andrew Malcolm, the Prince of Twitter.
Well, they're all kind of, they've been out for a while, so I call them replays. But Conan O'Brien, he said, all the Today Show hosts went makeup free on today's program, mostly uneventful, except for the revelation that Al Roker is really a tiny Japanese woman. I like that one. And then another corner one. He says the restaurant chain The Salad Works has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Analysts attribute the failure to it being a salad restaurant located in America.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. And finally, another Conan. He says Starbucks has just launched a home delivery service. It's perfect for anyone too lazy to walk one block in any direction.
There you go. So that one's perfect for America.
Yeah. Right.
Salad restaurant, not so much. All right. Well, you know what else is perfect for America? The Prince of Twitter.
Your segues, Ed. They're prize winners.
There you go. I am the king of segues. But you're the Prince of Twitter and the regent of redstate.com. Andrew Malcolm at AHMalcolm on Twitter and redstate.com for working rights. Andrew, thanks so much for being with us this week.
You bet, Ed. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
All right. We'll be back with more from the Ed Morrissey Show, so stay tuned. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com for Town Hall. Iran got much more than it could expect, much more, brags Vladimir Putin's negotiator, to the talks to reinstate Barack Obama's Iran deal. Not only did Russia deliver a better deal for the Iranian terrorist financing theocrats, Mikhail Ulyanov bragged that China got in on the act too. Our Chinese friends were also very efficient and useful as co-negotiators, Ulyanov bragged. Ulyanov's declaration has all but confirmed that a national security disaster authored by Russia and China may come in days. How is this good news in any way for the U.S.? And better yet, why are we outsourcing our national security to Putin's regime and Xi Jinping? Either Biden is desperate for a foreign policy win, or he wants access to more foreign sources of oil in order to avoid the strategic benefit of expanded American production. This latter potential would explain Biden's disgraceful wooing of Nicolás Maduro, the same Venezuelan dictator who has held 6 American oil executives on trumped-up charges for 4 years. The moral compass of the Biden administration badly needs recalibration. I'm Ed Morrissey. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show, and welcome back to one of my good friends, a guy I don't talk to enough these days, Jim Geraghty at National Review, nationalreview.com. Just an excellent analyst, excellent blogger, and a wise voice on a whole range of issues. And today we're going to be talking about the Biden administration's lack of strategic thinking on energy policy in a very, very dangerous world. Jim, welcome back.
Ed, it is good to see you again. It has indeed been too long, and I'm going to try to turn over a new leaf and not curse on your show as much as I used to. I used to be F-bomb Fridays and all that fun, but
that was fun.
You know, I'm older, wiser. Well, not wiser. I'm just more mature. You know, it's more of the same, but I'll try to keep it clean because you know.
Well, that's okay. You know that Dwayne Patterson sort of filled in for you on the whole F-bomb Thames thing anyway. So, but we miss the rest of your voice here, and I'm so glad to get you back. And you and I are writing about the same thing this morning as we're talking here on Monday morning, which is the the Biden administration's curious hat in hand attitude to some of the worst actors, by their own definition, some of the worst actors in the world, to try to make up for the Russian oil that we're apparently still buying from Vladimir Putin. And you wrote about the Saudis. And look, I mean, I think the Saudis are a problematic partner, but that's not exactly how Joe Biden described them in 2019, Jim, which you pointed out brilliantly this morning.
Yeah. So, every now and then, due to my frustrations with the Republican Party as it's currently constituted, my frustrations with President Trump, someone will say, "Why don't you go become a Democrat? Why don't you pull a whole Jen Rubin or Tom Nichols or somebody else?" And there's a lot of reasons I can't become a Democrat, but one of them is Democrats do not see the whole world clearly, and there are a lot of things that drive me crazy about the Democrats in this aspect. One of them is their emphasis, their insistence that when they're in power, when they're in government, they deploy, Ed, what's called smart power. Maybe John Kerry is like the worst defender of this, but Hillary Clinton, almost every Democrat talks about, no. When you see the world as a Republican, you see a lot of hard choices. Very often, when dealing with hostile states, economic pressures, the so-called, New World Order or global order, all these things are situations where you're not very rarely going to have a good option. And you're trying to choose the least bad option, and every decision you make is going to have unforeseen consequences and trade-offs and stuff like that. But not in the minds of the Democrats. In the minds of the Democrats, we can always work with our allies. We can always get tough with our enemies, but we never have to go to war. It's always this, don't worry, we're going to perfectly, calibrate this. Biden is a particularly bad offender at this. And throughout the last, year and change, I've been talking about all the different times on the campaign trail, Biden made something sound very easy. And then, of course, he gets into office and it turns out to be much tougher. The one that, that I wrote about this morning is that back in a debate, November 2019, Biden was like, we're going to get tough with the Saudis. We're going to make them the pariah state that they are. Now, if they are a pariah state, you don't have to make them a pariah state. But
right.
Biden is speaking off the cuff. I'll let that one slide. But the idea was very much that he was going to get tough with Mohammed bin Salman. And that, famously, Trump had not had any type of response, much of a significant response to the, murder and dismemberment of Khashoggi. The Saudis have always been a difficult and challenging ally. They've always been terrible in terms of human rights and things like that. We needed their oil, and as far as they have Mecca and Medina within their territory. And the attitude of most American administrations, Republican and Democrat, has always been, look, we would never choose these guys to be in charge, but they're probably better than anyone who would replace them. And there was always this challenging, on and off alliance. But dismembering a guy who had a green card in the consulate in Istanbul, that was a pretty big provocation.
That's a big one, yeah.
That's really tough to overlook and not act like it. And I remember at the time, I think it was even Lindsey Graham and lots of other Republicans like, look, we have to send some sort of signal. And I kind of felt like it. I think I'm remembering this off the top of my head, so if I get this wrong, but I believe at the time I said, like, you got to say to the Saudis, we're putting you in the timeout box for a year. Maybe in a year we can go back to renormalization. Maybe in a year we can start to thaw things again. But you went too far. We've got to do something to demonstrate, no, we don't approve this. Trump really didn't go and do that. And Biden made it sound like, boy, we're really going to come down on them like a ton of bricks. Then Biden gets into office, and he originally said, we're going to cut off all arms sales. And then he got into office and said, we're going to cut off some arms sales, a few, the ones that we know are connected to Yemen, because the Saudis were indeed using our weapons in a pretty indiscriminate manner in their the battle in Yemen against Iranians. And so all of a sudden, all these things that look really simple on the campaign trail look much harder once you're in the Oval Office. And so people who had been really upset about Khashoggi already felt like Biden had sold out or kind of wimped out on really confronting the Saudi regime. Then oil prices begin increasing throughout the year 2021. And now we're in a circumstance where Axios is reporting that Biden is willing to make a visit to Saudi Arabia and metaphorically come hat in hand and meet with bin Salman and basically kind of say to the Saudis, hey, all is forgiven. What's a little dismemberment amongst friends? Happens to the best of us. We're not going to judge you. We're all going to get along. Hey, how about some more oil? Now, we can argue about whether that's a good idea. And we can argue about whether we want to import more oil from Saudi Arabia and whether, like, maybe in the end, as frustrating as it is, better bin Salman than whoever would replace him. But at the same time, we 2 years ago, we were energy independent, right?
Right.
In addition to every other aspect of places where we could drill, shale, fracking, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things I wrote about this years ago, Ed, is that off the coast of California, roughly 50 gallons of oil per day spurt forth from the ocean seafloor naturally, right?
Right.
They don't do any more drilling. They shut down a lot of the platforms out there, but Mother Nature is basically spitting oil at us into the ocean. And heaven forbid we went down there and, one, we could put a cap on it and try to stop that leak, or we could, put a pipe down there and get it and use it. Boy, wouldn't that be terrific? But hey, it's not like California needs gasoline these days. Right?
No, not at all.
Only $7 a gallon, at least at one station. So
they're only having 3 brownouts a day now in California. Yeah. They're down to 3 brownouts a day in California. So that's a good sign. At the same time too, Jim, while they're sucking up to the Saudis, the pariah state, right, that Joe Biden had declared, they're also going down to Venezuela to talk to Nicolás Maduro about buying more Venezuelan crude. Now, Venezuela does sit on a legit massive sea of oil. It also happens to be really dirty oil. I mean, part of the issue for Venezuela is that hardly anybody can refine that stuff except themselves and the Americans. And they've managed to arrest everybody who could refine it in Venezuela. And at the same time, by the way, and Jazz is the one who reminded me of this. He's on vacation this week, but he's the one who reminded me of this, is that at present, Maduro is holding 6 American oil executives in prison and has for the last 4 years. They lured them down there in 2017 to talk about, restarting Citgo's operations down there and arrested them on, trumped up corruption charges. Now Biden's going to ask Maduro to become closer to the United States while he's holding basically American oil executives hostage down there. I mean, this is not strategic strength, Jim.
But not only that, I think I think it was someone else on Twitter, so forgive me for not attributing this correctly, but at the point of the observation, you would think the Biden team had never heard of the concept of leverage, right? Because if you're Venezuela, Russia's not coming to your rescue anytime soon. Russia is about to become this giant economic pariah. Their economy is tanking, as we've all heard. That I don't think they're supposed to open the stock market in Moscow until Thursday. When
maybe.
When your stock market is closed for the entirety of Mardi Gras, that's a bad sign. That's a sign that's all going to drop like a stone and stuff. So if you're Venezuela, this is when the U.S. should be going to Venezuela, and maybe you give them the carrot and you say, look, you release our guys, maybe we can start doing business again, but also Russia's not going to come rescue you. I don't know if you can count on the Chinese to come rescue you. You guys are in dire straits. You've got oil, but you can't refine it. Your people are starving. You've got all of this unrest down there. We can do business with you, but you got to start making, you got to play ball with us, and you got to start making some concessions we want. We are interested in having some of your oil, but, and as you said, there's only 2 countries that can really take have the capacity to refine it. Oh, by the way, wouldn't it be nice if we built more refineries in this country? Other than was there one in California? Because otherwise we haven't built one in 30 years in this country.
There may have been one that was on the books for California. I'm not sure if they built it, and I'm not sure that they'd be able to in the current political climate.
We've expanded capacity at existing ones, but we really haven't just taken it, built a new one from scratch in 30 years. Because they're ugly. It looks like I grew up in New Jersey, right? You drive New Jersey Turnpike, you see oil refineries. They're not pretty. I'm not going to lie to you.
I grew up almost just down the road from one in La Mirada, California. I mean, at Santa Fe Springs, they had the big outgassing flame that you could see for miles, and you could smell it all. You could smell it all day long. No, I'm familiar.
It's not pleasant, but on the other hand, one of the upsides was, it's been a while since I checked it. For a while in New Jersey, it was a little bit cheaper than the others than in surrounding states.
Right.
Some of that was a tax issue. New York used to tax the bejesus out of it, and I assume they still have. But the flip side was that the further you live from an oil refinery, the more it costs to get the gas to your local gas station. So New Jersey generally had slightly cheaper. So there's an upside to having oil refineries in your neck of the woods. So, again, if we wanted, we talked a good game about energy independence. It was interesting, think back to George W. Bush. This is a sign of how long you and I have been doing this.
Right.
America is addicted to oil. I'm doing the Bill Clinton thing. It's not really that. Bush was more.
America. Yeah, no. I was substituting. America is addicted to oil.
And the irony is that we by the Trump years we had actually gotten there. Now that wasn't all Trump, although it certainly he had lifted a whole bunch. I think the Obama administration would like to take credit for it. I don't think they really can, but I think you can point out, look, spike in prices makes investment in new oil fields worthwhile, new technologies, fracking, things like that. And the U.S. hang on to say, the U.S. and the U.S. oil industries companies basically said, you know what, we have a lot this year. We don't have to ship it in on oil tankers all the way from halfway around the world. We can get it here, we can develop it here, and we can sell it here. And by 2019, 2020, the U.S. was a net energy exporter.
Right.
And then Biden got into office. That all of a sudden, now, it's not just what he did, which because it probably didn't have an immediate cost. We didn't see oil prices, gas prices spiking in early 2001. Some of it was reduced demand. Pandemic was still going on. People were just starting to get vaccinated, stuff like that.
Right.
There is a tendency on our side to act like there's some sort of lever in the Oval Office that controls gas prices, and it's not just that, right? A lot of it's demand based. People drive more in summer. They go on summer vacations. They drive around. Demand gets higher. A lot of places they have a winter fuel and they have a summer fuel.
Yes.
And that transition process can cause prices to spike because places have to transition over the refineries and the requirements and things like that. So that stuff, it's not simply one. U.S. federal policy isn't the only thing. But having said that, between Keystone Pipeline and not drilling more on federal lands, there's a very clear signal of the Biden administration to the oil and natural gas industry. We hate you. We're not here to help you. We're going to make everything as tough as possible for you. And we're going to make all these cars electric. And don't ask where the electricity comes from.
What you're talking about here is there's two different ways in which which gas prices come from, right? One is futures markets, the other is spot markets. And spot markets are very volatile, but what we're talking about here is the impacts on the futures markets from policy changes in the White House. And those policy changes started famously on day one because Joe Biden wanted to emphasize that, we're going to get rid of the fossil fuels. So he signed a bunch of EOs that restricted future exploration and extraction on federal lands. It didn't restrict anything that was already in process, but the futures market looked at that and said, well, we know which way this is going to go, and we're now going to start pricing this in terms of reduced American production, because that is exactly what Joe Biden's been promising, is reduced American production and eventually, reducing it down to as close to zero as he can get. That's a rational response to this. And the rational action to take now, if you want to lower prices, is to roll back those restrictions. Even Larry Summers, right? Clinton administration, Obama administration.
Oh, you mean the inflation prophet, the man who Cassandra, the man who warned us, the man who kept saying there's going to be terrible inflation if you keep throwing around checks full of money. But yes, that's Larry Summers.
That Larry Summers, yeah. Just in case anybody was wondering, thank you, Jim, for clarifying. That was the Larry Summers.
What would this Larry Summers guy know about economics, right? Yeah.
Nothing at all. He was saying you got to roll back the regulation on the oil and gas industry if you want to lower inflation in the short run and in the long run. You've got to lower the price of fuel because fuel is a force multiplier. The higher fuel goes, the higher the costs are at every stage of the distribution chain. And that's a compounding force on inflation. But even beyond inflation, we're talking about strategic thinking here. We had strategic leverage over Vladimir Putin. Maybe the only strategic leverage that we actually really had over Vladimir Putin was keeping oil prices low so they didn't have the money to do this. And it's not just Russia. It's not just Venezuela. It's also Iran. They're talking about now buying more oil from Iran to replace Russian oil. And Iran is a serious rogue threat. It's insane to be going after Iranian oil at this point.
The only way that this makes sense, it doesn't make any sense logistically, but if you are Joe Biden and you see U.S. domestic energy production, particularly in oil and natural gas, it's like the worst possible thing. If you decide, okay, we're going to import more oil from Iran and Venezuela, at some point in the future, a year from now, 2 years from now, you can say, okay, we've had enough. Our oil prices are back down again. And you guys are still the SOBs you always were. You're still human rights abusers. You're still sponsors of terrorism. That's it. We're not importing your oil anymore. Right? You could do that. If you set up U.S. domestic energy production, that's much harder to quote unquote turn off.
Right.
Right. Once you start a well drilling and all that kind of stuff, that process is in there. And the other thing also I think observation is that Americans like having domestic energy production. Republicans have been calling at it for a long time. Democrats have been saying, no, solar panels and wind, that can solve everything. Well, and of course, what we're learning and what Europe has learned really brutally tough is that solar power and wind power, as nice as they are not sufficient to meet your energy needs now, and it's probably not going to be sufficient for a good long while. The flip side of this also is that it's not that the oil prices were the only reason Russia invaded. I think Vladimir Putin has had this is off colors, has had a hard on for Ukraine for a quite long time.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
During the Russian Empire, we're make Russia great again. This idea of the Holy Rus, right? The Russian people. I had this post that I wrote on Friday that I finally kind of feel like I cracked something in Putin's thinking. There's a certain kind of philosophy in Russia. It's quasi-religious, the idea that the Russian people are holy. It ties into the Russian Orthodox Church. And the interesting thing is, if you live in another country in Russia, in what is legally Ukraine, but you're a Russian speaker, you worship at the Russian Orthodox Church, you are ethnically Russian, then you are Russian in the eyes of Vladimir Putin. And that he has a duty to protect you. He has a responsibility to take care of you by coming over and invading and bombing you. Okay, yes, it's fuzzy thinking, but the idea that Putin is on a quasi-religious, as I was trying to characterize it to somebody, it's very hard to tell where the Blues Brothers were on a mission from God philosophy stops and where it is my destiny, it is my fate, I am called by history, that this is my purpose in life, right? And that right. Explains it. But I think that's a big primary one. But the fact that energy prices have been very high certainly probably made Putin feel like he had maximum leverage over the West, and that he might not have it 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And this all assumes, of course, that Putin's not dying of cancer or something.
Right. And that means that certainly could be part of the issue there too, because he's, there's lots of different things that factor into this. And I completely agree with you that this has been his mission all along, because I've been arguing all along, as have you, that Putin is not a Democrat. He's a small d Democrat. He's not a world order kind of guy. This is a Russian imperialist. He's a former KGB colonel who turns out to be a terrible general, by the way. But he's a Russian imperialist. He wants to put the band back together, only without the Soviet label on it. And in that sense, he's no different than Russians have been for centuries. This is a common thread in Russian history. The Soviet version of it was just a version of it. So yeah, my point though is that the high oil prices was an enabling factor. Yeah. He had a lot more money. He had a lot more capital. He could afford to burn some of it. Political capital as well as actual financial capital. And he's still able to get that money because we won't sanction those sales, in part because Europe is addicted to it and they're not going to be able to disconnect from it anytime soon.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's extraordinarily frustrating about this is that you and I are roughly the same age. You might be a little older than me, Ed, but not by, we're both old enough to remember the Cold War, right?
Yes.
And so even if I didn't do the ducking under my desk for air raid drills, I'm not a baby boomer, I'm Generation X. I remember watching, the day after, right? And America with a K, the Reagan era chapters of the Cold War. And so my attitude is always I don't want to say I never trust Russians, but I want to say that I'll never probably trust the Russian government that much. And I think you put your finger on something, which is that you look back through Russian history. One, they've always had this on the one hand, this I would say boastfulness, this we are a great empire, we are we are this pride, and also I think the flip side, insecurity, because they looked over at Europe, at the great the British Empire, the French, all the great cities of Europe, and this insecurity, this sense of to them we are the backwater, to them we are the primitive, we're not as sophisticated as them. That's why they've always taken great pride in their high arts, Baryshnikov, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
That's why there's enormous pride, and also the flip side of that coin is enormous insecurity. Well, you get invaded by Napoleon, you get invaded by Hitler. They have this attitude of, well, we need this barrier of countries. We need everything between, say, Germany and us needs to be our defensive wall. And that to do that, we need that to be in our control. Now, I can sympathize that to a certain extent, but we can point out Ukraine wasn't going to invade anybody.
Right.
Poland's not going to invade anybody. The Baltic states aren't going to, like, there's this entire, like, it's entirely this paranoia. Now, I think what's much more realistic and likely was that Putin looked at what Ukraine was turning into. And we should have no, they had corruption problems. They had, and it wasn't just Hunter Biden. You know, like even the guys we like probably had some dirty, habits over there. Ukraine was not a perfect country. The Baltics, Poland, all of Eastern Europe, they've all got their flaws, but none of them are going to be this grand military conquest, going out and conquering their neighbors or anything like that. But what they are is thriving and becoming more and more European, more and more. I'm going to call it the European idea of free market. We Americans might say that's pretty socialist for our taste, but nonetheless, more and more freedom of expression, more and more politically democratic. And as a result of that, is that a threat to Russia? No, that's a threat to Putin. And that, I keep coming back to Napoleon in this conversation. Or is it the state is me? I am the state?
Yeah, l'état c'est moi. Yeah.
Thank you. I knew you'd have the French pronunciation there. In the end, Ukraine was no threat to Russia, but Ukraine becoming a thriving democracy was very strongly potentially a threat to Putin. And at some point, the Russians say, "Why are we doing this? Why we have as many? We could live that happy middle class lifestyle. We could live like Europeans." And I think if there's any potential long run good outcome of this, is that the Russian people who are going to suffer intensely from the sanctions we're inflicting and being cutting off the world. Like at the beginning of all this, I was very much like, I want to hit these guys hard, but I remember after World War I, let's not, how much do we want to deliberately impoverish a country that's got 4,500 nuclear warheads?
Right. Yeah.
We spent a lot of the post-Cold War years worrying about somebody selling a nuke to, Islamist terrorists or somebody else like that. Now, after seeing all the, I'm now at the point like, okay, screw these guys. Let's screw them. Let's squeeze them. Let's impoverish these guys. Russians have to learn there's a consequence to allowing this kind of maniacal autocrat to take control of your country.
Right.
And if you guys have, if this means a decade of impoverishment, that means a decade of impoverishment. We'll let you get wealthy again, but it may involve, either denuclearization or some sort of long-term step to ensure that this kind of, outright Russian imperial disaster does not happen again. And, God only knows how long that'll take, Red.
Yep. Well, Jim Geraghty of nationalreview.com, I think that's a wise spot in which to conclude.
Online too.
Is it the FSB?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, tell them we all say hi over here, Jim.
They knew we were listening anyway. But yeah,
It's Zoom. What can you do? Jim Geraghty, nationalreview.com. At Jim Geraghty, by the way, on Twitter as well. Go follow him on Twitter. Does great work. Jim, it's been too long. It won't be as long the next time. I guarantee it. This is a blast.
All right. Great to see you, Ed. Take care. Stay safe, too.
You do as well. We'll be back with more from the Ed Morrissey Show.